Okay, we can give it a minute more to start. We need one more speaker. Yoel, are you ready? Good. Yeah. I think it's. I will come to. We will find out. All right. And we can start. Now we are complete. Good afternoon and welcome to the second session of our this year's conference. This second session is dedicated to female doctors. And we have three speakers today with us. Naomi Kojen from Moshe David Gaon Center for Ladino Culture from Belgrade, Serbia. Then Victoria van Orden Martínez from Lund University in Sweden. And Yoel Yaari from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Israel. Each of them will have a talk that fits this topic. And now we'll introduce Naomi. Naomi Kojen is a cultural worker, splitting her time between Israel and Serbia, with extensive experience in translation for projects in commercial, academic, and cultural spheres. She holds a Master of Philosophy degree in Chinese Studies from Cambridge University and a BA degree with a double major in East Asian Studies and multidisciplinary program in arts from Tel Aviv University. Her professional background includes work with the October Salon, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Belgrade, and the Gaon Center for Ladino Culture. She works on cultural projects in the public and private sector with an emphasis on production, communication, research, and translation. And she will today have a talk titled Honor the Doctor for Her Service, the Life and Legacy of Dr. Roza Papo. Naomi.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me at this conference and coming to this talk. As you know, I will speak about Dr. Roza Papo. Roza Papo is emblematic of the contribution of Jewish healthcare workers, both male and female, during World War II and also after when they rebuilt the Yugoslav healthcare system. Since you already heard her name mentioned a few times today, you understand that she's one of the most famous examples of, let's say, Jewish excellence within Yugoslavia. And in July 1973, she became the first woman to hold the rank of general, both in Yugoslavia and also in the Balkans as a whole. Okay, so born to parents, Gabriel and Miriam Papo, in 1914, Roza grew up in Bjelave, a poor neighborhood in Sarajevo where mostly Sephardi Jews lived. She had a brother, Albert Papo, a sister, Flora, who had a husband and also a small girl. She completed elementary school and high school for girls in Sarajevo before deciding to study medicine. Her parents were hesitant, but ultimately they didn't stand in her way. And since there was no option to study medicine in Sarajevo, she went to Zagreb. In Zagreb, in the student cafeteria, she met many young Jewish people. Most of these Jewish students were Zionists, and they broadly held left-wing ideas and views. Among them was this gentleman, Hugo Klein, who would become her fiancé. Many of these students that she met in the cafeteria, including Klein, were communists. While Roza didn't join any communist organization, she became active in left-wing circles, she went to demonstrations, collected donations for medical aid, and so on. After she completed her studies, she got her first job in Olovo, a mining town near Sarajevo, as a social security doctor. She was there when the war in Yugoslavia broke out in April of 41. Hugo and Roza never got married. He was killed that same year in 41. According to second-hand accounts, he was taken with other communists from Zagreb to Kerestinac concentration camp that was run by the Ustaša. Roza managed to survive the Ustaša regime because of her profession as a doctor. As a Jew, she was forced to wear a yellow band on her arm, and guards followed her while she was working. Todor Vujosinović, that you see here, was the commander of the partisan Orden detachment, and he wanted Roza to join as they needed a serious doctor. There was even a plan in place where she would be kidnapped by the partisans, but that fell through, and instead she was taken by the Chetniks. In his book, Vujosinović explains how he came to Olovo, where he met Roza. He managed to negotiate with the Chetniks and take her back to their detachment. He was immediately impressed by the effect she had on the hospital, on the young women that she quickly taught the basics of hygiene, and also the patients themselves, the wounded. But only 2 days after she arrived, there was an air raid and Roza was injured. A bomb hit the hospital and a shard probably tore off a part of her face. When she regained consciousness, she directed the young woman how to clean her wound, and she managed herself to put that part of her face back. She was very afraid that she might lose her eyesight, but she was lucky that she didn't. While in Ozren, she also completed her first surgery, together with her newly trained staff. Dr. Papo made an operation room out of a pigsty while carefully disinfecting it and covering it with clean sheets. According to Yasha Al-Muli, she had a surgical textbook, one of the few things she managed to bring from all of them. In May 1942, Dr. Papo moved to Šekovići to run the hospital out of the Lomnica monastery. Once again, she organized courses for young women in the partisans. Soon, however, she got sick with epidemic typhus, but she luckily recovered. On April 1st, 1943, Dr. Papo was told that the Chetniks are planning an attack on them. Together with a trusted nurse, she transferred 100 movable wounded on foot and with horse carts going north through the mountain range of Majevica to the village of Donja Trnava. When the Chetniks came, they didn't find any of the wounded and they were saved. And here you can see an image of Dr. Papo's pistol. It's a Beretta M 1934. And you can see that with the original holster, it is presented today in the Museum of Yugoslavia, if anybody is interested. And also next to it, there is a small box with her medical tools from the war. In Trnava, Dr. Papo established a partisan hospital. As part of the hospital, there were dugouts, so holes under the ground, where they hid the wounded during attacks. During one of these attacks, Dr. Papo was hiding in the dugout with 2 comrades with a bomb in hand, waiting to see if the enemy would discover them. According to Roza's daughter Mira, this was the hardest time in the war. Many of the wounded in the dugouts were murdered when discovered by the enemy. Also, during that period, troops from Srem, which is the region between Serbia and Croatia today, came to eastern Bosnia. They were large men, they were well fed, and they were not used to these conditions of hunger and rough terrain. Many of them suffered, and they only had rye bread to eat, which was hard to digest. Although Dr. Papo worked tirelessly day and night, she couldn't save everyone. After the incident where she hid in the dugouts, she decided to transfer all the wounded to village home of partisan loyalists. And then, dressed like this, as a peasant woman, she would make the rounds, checking up on the wounded. In her book, Dr. Vera Gavrilović describes Roza as a lively, devoted woman who won over the hearts of the fighters, but also of the local people. With little resources, she continued to perform surgeries. She was in Donja Trnava until August 1943. After that, she became the medical officer of the 6th East Bosnia Brigade and was transferred to several other posts until the end of the war. She was in Zagreb with the troops when the war ended. After the war, she returned to Sarajevo, but everyone she knew was gone. Her father was killed in Jasenovac, her mother, sister Flora, and small daughter were all killed in an Ustasha concentration camp near Travnik. The place of death of her brother was unknown. So all of her life in Sarajevo was gone, and she even didn't want to enter her family home again, and instead she stayed in a hotel. So when the army called, she left for Belgrade. In Belgrade, at a New Year's officer party, Roza met Moritz Levi, a Sephardi Jew from Bihać and also a partisan officer. Like Roza, Moritz suffered tremendous loss. His wife Palomba and small daughter Rivka were brutally murdered. The two fell in love and made a humble home in Belgrade. They had two children, Mirjana and Zoran. However, Zoran died at the age of 14 in a tragic swimming accident. Shortly after the war, she was tasked with heading the infectology clinic at the Military Medical Academy. She published dozens of papers, completed specializations in Paris and Moscow, and later became a professor at the Military Academy. Like I said before, in 1974, she was the first woman in Yugoslavia and the Balkans to receive the rank of general. She spent 22 years building the infectology clinic, where she was beloved and respected by the patients and the staff. Shortly before her pensions, she left the clinic and worked to make a comprehensive recruitment system for the army. Despite her reaching the highest ranks of the state apparatus, Dr. Papo didn't have political ambitions. Instead, she spent her free time volunteering in her local community and for the Red Cross. Besides a few interviews that she gave when she received the rank of general, she stayed out of the public life and, as I said, lived a quiet life in Belgrade. Shortly after she already retired, she got cancer, and the staff from her clinic insisted on taking care of her. Her daughter Mira says that even when she already gave up, they really insisted and fought for her all the way. She died in 1984 at the age of 70. Roza Papo wrote several articles recounting the events of the war, specifically from the perspective of the medical service of the Yugoslav partisans or the National Liberation Army. In most cases, these articles were academic in nature and were published as part of large volumes that were dedicated to different aspects of the war. These accounts aim to present a succinct and precise depiction of the developing events from the perspective of the medical system. They deliberately omitted personal narratives, experiences, and the opinions of the authors. Before these large collections were published, Roza wrote an article for the Military Medical Review in 1966 called So We Don't Forget. This was a little more personal in nature and had some recollections of particular places, comrades, and events. But even here, what we see is a very measured and reserved individual who mentions personal events such as her injury and illness in passing. These texts, beyond their historical and strategic value, serves another purpose. It was a unique opportunity to commemorate by name the many brave men and women who participated and even died during the war. When interviewing Roza's daughter Mira, she described her mother as someone who did not like talking about the past, the life in Sarajevo that was lost, the hard reality of the war. This is something that we now understand to be quite common among Holocaust survivors. In Mira's opinion, her mother didn't like talking about the past and never wanted to bear witness or write down her memoirs because of the pain, but also because the difficulty of these topics and the harsh truths that were beneath. There were many hard decisions that were made during the war, and some of them came at the expense of the wounded, her patients. Politically, Roza Papo was a loyal communist. Like many Jews, she found refuge from the Ustasha by joining the partisans. In a world where almost every environment was hostile to the Jews, she found a place where she was needed, recognized, and respected. From there, she developed a great respect and loyalty for the Communist Party. She didn't tolerate the criticism of her children and what they thought of the party, or approved of them demonstrating in the 1968 student protests in Belgrade. As Mira explained, because of this loyalty, she didn't want to express her criticism, but at the same time, she didn't want to lie. Roza was elevated by the party for her brilliance and talent. She managed one of the most prestigious medical institutions in Yugoslavia and shaped it in her image for over 20 years. Despite the accolades and unwavering loyalty to the party didn't always reciprocate. Even though she was a general, Roza was never awarded an apartment or the housing she was entitled to by law. And when her children convinced her to ask for an expansion of the apartment that she had through her husband, she was denied. It is hard to say what happened, whether it was because she was Jewish or because she was a woman, or it was an oversight, but it's important to note that all of these accolades have a certain limit. While conducting this research, I heard many stories about the people she helped, her patience, kindness, and humanity, that she always showed her patients. I can't tell them because I don't have time, but if you want to listen, you can talk to me after. It's hard to imagine so much loss in one's life. Losing all your family, your parents, siblings, fiance, having a husband who buried a wife and a small daughter, losing your son, friends, comrades, patients, the young girls that you trained during the war. But in response to death, Roza Papo chose life by rebuilding a family through her profession, by volunteering for the Red Cross, and by always healing others. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. And as in our last session, previous session, we are going to hear all three speakers, and then we are going to have a discussion. So our second speaker is Victoria van Orden Martínez, and she is a researcher at the Department of History at Lund University in Sweden, where she is associated with the North European Center for Research about Anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. She's a non-residential fellow of the University of Southern California, USC Shoah Foundation, and a member of the Migrant Knowledge Network of the German Historical Institute, Washington. Her primary current research project is titled Nazi Oppression, Forced Migration, and Glass Ceilings, the Journeys of Women Survivors of Nazi Persecution into the Natural and Medical Sciences. And she will present on a topic, Being a Physician Was My Gun Against the Germans, 3 Jewish women doctors during the Holocaust.
Thank you so much, Dragana. And thank you. It's already been a very interesting conference. I'm very happy to be here. So without further ado, let me see if I can get this. Okay. The historiography of the Second World War and the Holocaust has from the beginning been intertwined with medicine, science, and knowledge, perhaps most prominently in relation to intellectual refugees such as physicians, scientists, and others fleeing Nazi Germany and other countries faced with Nazi persecution and occupation, and to the sadistic medical experiments conducted by German physicians. My current project takes a different tack, one that moves away first and foremost from the perpetrators, but also shifts the focus from the experiences, scientific contributions, and knowledge of intellectual refugees during the war to those of Jewish and non-Jewish medical professionals who survived the war and what they brought to science and medicine before, during, and especially after the Holocaust. And importantly, my focus is on women. I examined female Jewish and non-Jewish survivors of Nazi persecution who studied for degrees and worked in the natural and medical sciences outside their home countries to understand how their experiences under Nazi oppression and as forced migrants shaped their career paths in these male-dominated fields. In this presentation, I will discuss one aspect of the research questions I am addressing in this project. How were their identities shaped by their experiences of Nazi persecution and in transit, and in turn, how did their identities shape their careers? During the Holocaust, Jewish women worked in medicine alongside men, including as forced laborers, in clandestine schools and in underground resistance movements. Unlike men, however, women's medical activities during the Holocaust have often been marginalized, including by disregarding their efforts as quote, care work, gendered female, rather than serious medical work, gendered male. While there is no doubt that care was an integral part of women's medical work during the Holocaust, there is also no doubt that this work was comparable to men's. In this presentation, I highlight 3 Jewish women and their medical work during the Holocaust in 3 distinct contexts. Dr. Ruth Pick in the Theresienstadt ghetto, Dr. Stanislava Rubilowicz in the Warsaw ghetto, and Dr. Edda Nashveld in the independent state of Croatia. Together and individually, they exemplify how women were working alongside and at the same level as men, but have rarely been recognized in this way. Using their testimonies and other primary and secondary sources, I'll discuss aspects of the women's actions and experiences and shed light on their motivations for and circumstances of their involvement in medical work before, during, and after the Holocaust as Jewish women that provide insight into the shaping of their identities and careers in the aftermath. It is appropriate, I think, to begin with Edda Nashveld, not only because she died here in Belgrade in 2012, but also because she inspired the title of this presentation. Born in 1916 in Slavonski Brod, then part of the Kingdom of Croatia-Slavonia, to a well-off Jewish family, she attended medical school in Zagreb, where she met her husband, Alfred Nashveld, who had come to Zagreb from Poland to study medicine. Although the anti-Semitic laws had prevented Edda from taking her final examinations to become a physician, it was as physicians that she and Alfred managed to survive the persecution of Jews in Zagreb and obtain work at the Institute for Endemic Syphilis in Banja Luka, where all the physicians were Jewish. Thanks to this work, they were also able to save Edda's mother. Despite this, they were not safe. Denounced as partisans, which they were, they went on the run. Edda was pregnant with their second child when her mother and young daughter were killed during Allied aerial bombing. Only 1 month later, Edda, who was still recovering from her own injuries in that attack, gave birth to her son with the assistance of members of the Yugoslavian resistance. Both she and Alfred served as physicians in the 39th Krajina Division of the Yugoslav partisans. Edda, Alfred, and their baby son Igor were among the partisans who liberated Zagreb in May 1945. The family stayed in Zagreb only long enough for Edda to take the examinations necessary to complete her medical degree. They then moved to Belgrade, where she specialized in microbiology and lectured at the Serbian Institute for Public Health until she retired. This necessarily brief background demonstrates how she played important roles in entangled histories of the Second World War and the Holocaust, the history of medicine, and women and gender. As I will do with each of the 3 women, I will now turn to how Edda's experiences shaped her identity. In her 1995 interview with the USC Shoah Foundation, 79-year-old Edda spoke at length and with great pride about her resistance activity. For instance, she says, "I can tell you that I was very proud that I was in the resistance. If I would live a second life and be in the same position, I would choose the same thing, to be in the resistance, because it was the only one option for us Jews to join the resistance. All the other doors were closed. Nowhere in Europe was such a possibility for Jews to fight with a gun against the Nazis as it was in Yugoslavia." Before the war, Edda had been active in Jewish life and activities, and, she later explained, had never been ashamed of being Jewish, even in what she called the most difficult times. As part of the resistance, however, being Jewish became intertwined with active and militant resistance. For Edda, this resistance, though militant, was exercised not by violence, but through her work as a physician and a sense of equality with others. As she said in 1995 of her time in the resistance, "I worked as a physician. I worked very hard the whole day. We were like a family, like I can't tell you. You had a special feeling. You were needed. You were respected. After 4 years, it was the first time I was equal to other people, that I had the same rights as my Serbian or Croatian or Muslim neighbor. I was equal, and I fought as a man, as a human being." However, and I think this is important to emphasize, her sense of equality, not least with men, was shaped on her own terms. Explaining her particular abilities in the resistance, she said, "Now I am with a gun in my hand. I can fight. I speak symbolically. I hadn't a gun. I worked as a physician. but it, being a physician, was my gun against the Germans. Stanislawa Rabilowicz was born in Warsaw in 1915 into a Jewish family, although, as she later recalled, her family did not live in a Jewish quarter, and she was not a practicing Jew. Like Etta Nashveld, she studied medicine but was unable to take all of her exams before the racial laws prohibited her from doing so. Instead, she was given a certificate of completion that enabled her to work in Jewish hospitals. She volunteered to work in an OB/GYN clinic in Warsaw before she was sent to the Warsaw Ghetto, where she worked in the hospital. She managed to have her son smuggled out of the ghetto to her mother, who lived on the Aryan side. Then in 1942, she escaped from the ghetto by joining a work group and obtained false papers with the help of her stepfather. While living under a false identity, she could not work as a physician, but she eventually returned to her profession when she joined the People's Army of Poland in Lublin as a physician. In Lodz, after the war, she was reunited with her son and took her medical exams and worked as an OB/GYN until the early 1980s. Stanislava's accounting of her experiences demonstrates how the fluctuations of the war shaped her identity in a nonlinear way. As she recalled later, Stanislava's Jewish identity was tied up with her profession. I sort of realized for the first time in medical school that I was different than others. So my Jewishness was put in the picture because we were persecuted in the university as Jews. Although there's not enough time today to elaborate, suffice it to say that her struggles for survival were closely tied to her work as a physician and the impact of her work on her identity. This can be seen through two incidents she discusses in her USC Shoah Foundation interview in 1996, both of which describe her work as a physician in the Warsaw Ghetto. Initially, her work gave her purpose and meaning, particularly in terms of supporting her family, including her young son, while her husband was in a work camp in Russia. Her pride and purpose evaporated, however, as she began to view her work as hopeless and herself, by extension, as useless. I had a breakdown, a very, very bad breakdown, still working in the hospital, she explained in 1996. The conditions and that I could not help anyone, and my words, my good words, were not worth anything, and I had nothing concrete to help people with, and my profession is not worth anything, and everyone will die. I got very depressed, and I tried to commit suicide. Her life spared, she took the actions that enabled her and her son to escape the ghetto. But the pattern of hope alternating with hopelessness and despair repeated itself until after the war, when, reunited with her husband after 6 years, the couple divorced, and she again attempted suicide. Ultimately, she successfully established a new life for herself as a physician and had a new marriage and lived a productive life, one that was characterized by an ability to adapt to change. Ruth Pick was born in Carlsbad in Bohemia in 1913 and graduated from medical school in Prague in 1938, just before the Anschluss. She and her husband Alfred, also a physician, managed to get work in the Jewish hospital in Prague, though Ruth was only permitted to work as a nurse. This work enabled the couple to avoid deportation until July 1943, when they were sent to Theresienstadt. At first, Ruth could only obtain cleaning work in Theresienstadt, but eventually she secured work as a physician. After further deportation to Auschwitz-Birkenau, from where she was sent to the Orden subcamp, she avoided formal medical work, something that I'll discuss in a moment. Eventually, Ruth was sent back to Theresienstadt and was there when the ghetto was liberated. After the war, she returned to Prague, where she and Alfred were reunited and resumed their medical careers. They emigrated to the United States in early 1949 and found employment at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago. Ruth dedicated the rest of her life to researching cardiovascular diseases. Once again, we find something different in the way Ruth related her experiences during her USC Shoah Foundation interview in 1997, particularly in terms of her identity as a physician during the Holocaust. Speaking of when she began working as a physician in Theresienstadt, Ruth said, "When I was new, I was so bright and young. I knew everything." She was, of course, being sardonic. Immediately after, she told how a patient with hunger edema died after she gave her a diuretic. Although she had been eager to work in her profession, her error caused her much regret, even years later, even as she was aware that her patient already had a death sentence. Ruth continued to work as a physician in Theresienstadt, gaining experience in highly unusual circumstances, but also a better sense of the limits of her profession and its hazards. By the time she was transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau and then to the Orden subcamp, she was more cautious and circumspect. Whereas medical work had contributed to her survival in Theresienstadt, she was aware that it could also be a death sentence. In 1997, she said, "The people I could talk to in Orden, they knew I was a physician, even though I did not want to work as a physician. If I had in Auschwitz said that I'm a physician, they would have put me as a physician to a strange transport. So I kept silent, and I went with some girls from Prague that I knew, at least some of them, and hid that I was a physician." This did not stop her from acting as a physician, however. Those who knew her came to her and sent others to her for medical help and treatment, which she provided, also in cases of immediate need. Ruth's understanding of herself indicates that her experiences contribute to shaping her identity as a medical professional that ultimately helped her to adapt in the post-war period. In addition to her experiences of gender bias in the laboratory at Michael Reese, Ruth's career was also impacted by gender norms at home. In 1997, she recalled and she refers, I don't have this up here, sorry, she refers to her husband, did not allow me, and I don't know why. He did not tell me before he died. He didn't let me take an internship, so I'm not licensed to practice medicine. Ruth's response to these constraints during her early career was simply, but it did not make a difference in the laboratory. I argue that through her experience as a medical professional during the Holocaust, Ruth had learned to be flexible and work and even thrive in the capacity fate dealt her. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And now we are going to our third speaker, Yoel Yaari. These are going to be the buttons, and you are going to direct them there. But I will first announce you. So, Yoel Yaari is the Henry and Enna Laird Professor of Research in Neurodegenerative Diseases at the Hebrew University Faculty of Medicine in Jerusalem. He has published numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals on basic molecular and cellular mechanisms of brain function and neurological diseases. Since 1980, he has also been teaching neuroscience to undergraduate and graduate students of medicine, pharmacology, and neurobiology, and has been awarded the Faculty Prize for Excellent Teaching multiple times. He has served as chairman and member in multiple university and faculty administrative, research, and teaching committees. In 2015, he began investigating also Holocaust historiography, focusing, among other topics, on women in the Holocaust medical care in FKL Auschwitz. He has published several Holocaust-related articles in public media. His documentary book, Portrait of a Woman, was recently published in Hebrew and is currently being translated into English. It has been optioned for a film by the British production company New Empire Pictures. Yoel, the floor is yours. Yes.
Thank you for inviting me, even though I come from another discipline. I need some help with this. Thank you again for inviting me. Even though I'm a neuroscientist by original profession, but now I'm in second career as a historian or a Holocaust researcher for the past 10 years. And I would like today to talk about female prisoner doctors in Auschwitz, and in particular about one of them, which is completely unknown in Auschwitz historiography. If you Google her name, you will perhaps find one sentence, even if you use AI, about her. And the reasons why she is unknown will be presented later. But I managed to find about 50 testimonies that her name is mentioned, and some of them will be shown here, and this is why I can draw a picture of this woman and her good sides and bad sides, and of course the chronology of her life. I also managed to meet some family members of her and to get more details about her pre-war and post-war experiences. So, as you know, as you know, the women's camp started in the Auschwitz I. It was inaugurated, if I may use this term, on March 26, 1942. And eventually, after a few months, the camp moved to Birkenau, first in Sector B1A, later in August 43, it expanded to Sector B1B, and the entire Sector B1 was the women's camp. You can see this sector here. And the hospital, which at first was one floor in one block, expanded, and eventually it became so big that it occupied one fourth of the women's camp. And you can see in yellow the area of the hospital, about perhaps 20 blocks altogether. And it had a fence of its own, and it actually was a camp, a separate camp within a camp. So the hospital within the women's camp, within Birkenau, within Auschwitz, if you want. And it had its own Lageralteste and other functionaries, which I will show you now. The conditions in the camp were awful. I will just quote a few descriptions of patients who were hospitalized there. You can see the sources below the citations. So the hospital wards were like the residential barracks. Each bed held 3 or 4 patients. They were kept together regardless of the type of illness they had. Typhus patients were infected with dysentery, and those who arrived with pneumonia contracted various types of typhus. Without exception, all of them developed purulent infections and scabies. The body of almost every woman was one large festering wound. There was no water, there were no sinks or toilets, no medications either. If medications were organized, they were only enough for a few among the thousands who needed them. There were cases where a nurse didn't notice for days that a patient had died and the corpse remained in the bed. The rats that swarmed in the barracks would gnaw at the corpses, but I also saw dying women whose ears or noses were bitten by these animals. This is, by the way, a testimony of Bella Yaari Chazan, who is my mother. She was hospitalized in the hospital, or as it was called, the Revere, and later became a nurse in the hospital. Every 3 days a selection took place. The women who were selected were taken to block 25, the death block. They were held there sometimes 10 days and even more without drink or food. The women tortured themselves knowing that they would be taken from there to gas chambers. The hospital had its own hierarchy, which was very similar to that in the women's camp itself. On top of this establishment were the SS camp doctors, and they were aided by sanitars. They were called the SSSDGs, usually men who had no medical experience. Under these SS doctors, who came to the hospital only to check for cleaning and mainly to perform selections, were the functionary prisoners who actually ruled the hospital on a daily basis. There were 2 main functionary prisoners: the hospital camp elder, the Revere Lageralteste, and the chief prisoner doctor. And under them were all the other functionaries, block elders, secretaries, block doctors, regular doctors, and pharmacists, and so on. Who were the 2 main functionary? Sorry, first of all, all of you know of Mengele, who did selections in the women's camp, but there were many other doctors. The most prominent ones are shown here: Fritz Klein, Werner Rode, Bruno Kietz, Horst Fischer, Hans König, and Mengele. And they were, as I said, aided by the SDGs, and some of them are mentioned here. The main functionary prisoners were the hospital camp elder Orly Reinhardt. You can find a lot of information about her. She published a book after the war. And the chief prisoner doctor for the most of the time of the hospital existence was Enna Weiss. And I'm going to talk about Enna Weiss. You will not find, as I said, much about her. So this is the only picture I found of her before the war. You can see her in the middle. She was born in Banska Štiavnica in Slovakia. And when she was deported to Auschwitz, she was an advanced medical student. She didn't finish her studies. And she was in the first transport sent from Slovakia to Auschwitz on 26th of March, 1942. What were her duties in the hospital? Well, one was representation of the hospital before the SS camp doctor, organization of prisoner doctors' work, responsibility for all other medical staff, Jewish and non-Jewish, medical decisions, whom to hospitalize, whom to treat and how, and whom to release from the hospital, allocation of medical equipment and medications to patients, accompanying the SS camp doctor during visits to the hospital wards, including when he did selections, and finally and sadly, conducting selections on her own, on the orders of the SS camp doctor. So she was in a very, very powerful position, deciding life and death, and it's quite surprising that I'm giving the first lecture in the worldwide, I believe, on Enna Weiss. So what about Enna Weiss? Some testimonies about her. Enna Weiss, this is a testimony of an Austrian prisoner doctor who knew her very well. She actually shared a room with her. Enna Weiss was a queen in Auschwitz. She was exceptionally beautiful, intelligent, talented, and decent. The most amazing thing about her was the ice-cold self-control with which she concealed her abysmal hatred of the Germans. And thus she was able to speak with the high-ranking SS officers the way she made them think that without her, everything would collapse. It was genius. She even made them condemn anti-Semitic remarks made by German prisoners. What was the survival strategy of Enna Weiss? And she told this to Ella Linges-Reiner, the Austrian doctor. Once, so the Austrian doctor wrote in her book, Prisoners of Fear. Once I asked her about the way she survives in the camp. She answered with brutal directness, "How do I survive in Auschwitz? My principle is to put myself in first, second, and third place. After that, not even one other prisoner. And then again me, and only after that, all the rest." And Ella Linges-Reiner commented about this statement. This formula expressed the only way of operating that enabled Jews to survive in Auschwitz. And since this woman had the wisdom and strength to adopt this way, she maintained for herself the senior position from which she could do something for the prisoners. Another prisoner commented about her. Enna Weiss had very significant influence over the camp doctor Werner Rode, who was actually in love with her, as several testimonies tell. And therefore, she had the opportunity to improve conditions in the hospital from every possible aspect. Unfortunately, she did nothing to improve the situation of the patients, since she only cared about the Slovaks. And the same testimony, she was responsible for the hospital pharmacy and distributed medicines to patients only in exchange for food that was sent to them in packages, or for gold, jewelry, and banknotes that they perhaps found in Canada, Camp Canada, or other places. Another Polish prisoner, doctor, testified about Enna Weiss. The camp doctor is the SS doctor, accompanied by several people, among them Dr. Enna Weiss, would appear in the revier and declare a curfew in the barracks. Then he ordered all the patients to get out from bed. Those who could not get up from bed were immediately registered for the gas chamber or for block 25. All those who could get up stood in a row and were marched before him, for the SS doctor. While walking, they showed their hands with the numbers. The doctor pointed his hand at the victims according to his whims of madness, and they were taken aside. And so the entourage went from barracks to barracks. Well, there are other testimonies which portray Enna Weiss as a woman who saved many patients, and now I will concentrate about that. One Polish prisoner wrote that the sick prisoners were waiting for the SS doctor. All had fever. Those diagnosed as having typhus were killed with injections, phenol injections to the heart. This was the job of the SDGs that I mentioned. We had an inmate doctor there, a Slovakian doctor under the name Enna Weiss, and she took over, became the chief doctor. As the SS doctor arrived, she reported no typhus, but flu, and as flu patients, they were saved from being killed. And this was a practice that is described in other testimonies about other doctors, that they made the wrong diagnosis in order to save the patients. Another testimony about saving patients is Margaret Glass-Larson. I don't remember how the prisoner doctors did it. I didn't have the appropriate understanding of it. Only know that they placed sick Muslim that is emaciated patients, women with typhus who could not be saved. I mean, they will die anyway, according to the doctor. So Enna Weiss knew how to judge this well. So she put those Muslim men or Muslim women in those beds that Dr. Rode or Mengele or whoever was doing the selection would certainly choose. And the healthier ones, they hid elsewhere. Sometimes it succeeded. If they had been caught, they would have been killed. Dr. Mengele would come from time to time to the scabies block to conduct an inspection or selection. According to him, accompanying him was Enna, the Slovak, a Jewish doctor, about 30 years old, who was his right hand and helped him with selections. We feared her mortally as well. On her hands were white gloves. For the gas, she selected the patients with the deepest wounds. That was her philosophy, to send the ones who have no chance to live and to save the others. But the nurses who viewed that and gave testimony, this is, by the way, my mother's testimony, looked at it differently, of course. We tried then to hide the seriously ill before the doctor, and before the SS doctor, or Enna Weiss, we presented the lighter cases. There were cases where the doctor did not conduct a selection, but ordered the block staff to make a list of seriously ill prisoners. It was known to us what the purpose was. Terror took hold of us. We too were forced to participate in the crime, and the dilemma was terrible. Enna Weiss explained to us that despite everything, this creates for us an opportunity to save the most valuable political prisoners, those who still harbored hopes of survival. And now there are testimonies about saving patients from selections. For example, once many women were selected, I think tuberculosis patients, to be taken supposedly to recovery. And then I was said that this was a lie, that they would be taken to the gas. And then Enna Weiss erased 3/4 of the names from the list. And later it turned out that those who were taken for recovery were indeed murdered. And one day in November 44, when I was in hospital, says another survivor, about 50 pregnant Hungarian, Slovakian Jewish women were brought in. I spoke to some. It turned out that they had been released from the gas chambers as a result of the intervention of Dr. Enna, she says Hungarian, Slovakian Jewess, who was friends with the German doctor. she got these women released from the gas chamber where they had been for 3 days without food. Okay, so I will summarize by 2 testimonies of 2 prisoner doctors who knew her well. One said, there was almost no one in the camp who saved as many lives as she did. And another said, in everything she did, her heart remained pure. After the evacuation of the camp, Enna Weiss joined the death march. She was transferred to Malcho, a women's camp, sub-camp of Ravensbrück. She returned to Czechoslovakia, completed medical studies at Charles University of Prague, married Frederick Wronski, emigrated to Australia in 1941, completed residency in medicine at Adelaide University Hospital in 1955. Here is a picture of her in the office around 1990. She died in 2004. Here is her grave in Adelaide at the age of 86. And I found an obituary about her. This is my last slide. Which said she was a very private person and only a few close friends knew of her difficulties in surviving the war. She never gave testimony of any kind. She did not have children, and therefore she was completely unknown. And I hope that now, with this talk and an article that I'm writing, we will know more about women doctors in Auschwitz and the dilemmas they faced and how they, the philosophy that they used in order to survive by themselves and to save as many patients as they could. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yoel, very much for this valuable talk. Indeed, we learned something about Enna Weiss, and let's hope that we are going to continue research on her and the other female doctors. And now we have the time for discussion. My colleague Andrea is here to help you with a microphone, so please feel free to please feel free to just raise your hand, and you will get the microphone very shortly. Yes, Billy.
I have a question to Yoel. You've studied the cases of female doctors. Have you done any research about male doctors at the same places? Because you referred to the hospital as female hospital. I guess it was something quite same or close to it for male prisoners.
Yeah, of course there were several male hospitals.
Can you
one was in
refer
Auschwitz
to them?
I, and one
Can you
was
refer to them?
in B2F, and then later on other places. Now I'm studying women. I study other.
I'm proud of you.
Other female Jewish, not only Jewish. I mean, actually, the second book I'm not starting to write is the hospital in the women's hospital in Auschwitz-Birkenau. So mostly women. Of course, I read a lot about men and books by men, male doctors, and I know quite a bit, but not as extensive as with women.
Because I wonder if there is any proportion, if we do comparison and contrast between the two cases.
Well, about the main hospital in Auschwitz I, there's a lot of literature about. There's less literature about the one which was in Birkenau, sector B2F. Very little, actually. But I have not investigated. I mean, it is necessary that someone will pick up this topic, yes.
Okay, there is Yvonne, and then Alessandro and Regina and Sweden. Okay.
Merci. Gracias. Just one remark and one question. What about Giselle Perel? Did they have Giselle Perel? She was also a doctor there. Did they have any interaction between the
No,
two?
okay. So
One,
if I ask you, when I give a lecture and I ask the audience, give me a name of a woman,
will
not a
say
woman
Giselle
doctor,
Perel.
from Auschwitz, usually I get one name. Some people say Anna Frank, others say Hannah Senesh, but if they manage to get a name, one name of a woman in Auschwitz, I get Gisela Perel.
but
okay?
did they have any interaction?
I heard your question. I'm introducing Gisela Perel was not in the women's camp in Birkenau. She was in the Hungarian women's camp. She arrived only in July 1944. So she was only 8 months, only of course, every day counts, but she was only 8 months in Auschwitz. She is the most famous Jewish survivor or Jewish prisoner doctor survivor, because in 1948 she already published her book, I Was a Doctor in Auschwitz, which was eventually made into a film,
She was
Out of
tried
the Ashes,
also.
in 2003.
Out of the Ashes.
And she's the most known, even though she's of also prisoner doctors, females who survived, she served the shortest period.
And she
Now-
was interrogated by the Americans.
Yeah, well,
also.
this you can read in the book about what happened to her. And but she was in camp, as I said, the Hungarian camp, which was called the Celager or B2C. There are another 5 Jewish female doctor survivors who gave testimonies and wrote books. 3 of them worked in Block 10 in Auschwitz I. Another one worked in the Gypsy camp. And only the other one, Margit Schwalwoba, also a Slovak, she worked together with Enna Weiss. The others, perhaps they knew her because there were some interactions, but there was no real contact.
Okay.
And there were many other Jewish prisoner doctors which we don't know of because they perished and they never gave testimony.
Okay, and just one more remark or something to think about is that I wrote a lot about the capos, and I found out that many female capos, or the one who we can allegedly call collaborators, went to Australia.
Yes.
So maybe it will help
Yes,
you with
yes. Well, the Slovaks, the young Jewish Slovaks who came together with Enna Weiss in March 1942, and later in additional transports, maybe altogether 7,000 women. They were the first in Auschwitz, and Gideon interviewed several of them, and like Magda Hellinger, Blau, and others, and the same happened with Enna Weiss, by the way, which some of them came to Israel, but they
couldn't cope.
They couldn't,
Yeah.
you know.
They
Either they were put on trial, like what's her name?
Vera Alexander.
No, Vera
she
Alexander
was testifying.
She was considered the good one.
Yeah, she testified
But
in Eichmann trial.
she was sent to 2 years in prison.
Yeah.
And but most of them who were in the gray zone, so to say, like Enna Weiss, who committed
Some crimes.
some crimes, they went to Australia, and they had a whole community there.
It was kind of a refugee place for them. Yeah.
They had a community there.
It's interesting.
And mostly in Melbourne. She was in Adelaide, but mostly in Wellington.
Adelaide,
But
yeah.
they communicated with them between themselves.
Themselves.
Yes.
So interesting to research their reaction between them and to compare Israel and Australia.
Question and a remark connected to the words of the colleague. In Israel, before the Eichmann trial, we know today that about the Kapos trial and the collaborators trial, like Vera Alexander. Someone in this trial claimed against Enna Weiss about collaboration or not? No.
I didn't find that. I know from a distant family member that once she came to Israel, I don't know if I have time. I'm taking the time of others. During the death march, Enna Weiss adopted a young boy who lived in Block 10. There were 3. That's a story that I will tell another time. There were 3 young boys who were sons of scientists, Jewish scientists who worked in Block 10. the experimental block in Auschwitz I. And one of them, called Carol, he went with his mother on the death march, and Enna Weiss knew his mother, and his mother died in Malchow, in the last camp where she was liberated, and she adopted his son. And she took him to Czechoslovakia, and then she wanted to take him to Australia. But he had an uncle in Israel, in Palestine at that time, and they wanted him to come to Palestine, which eventually it happened. There was a trial that she fought for him, but eventually she gave up, and he came to Israel. And he lived in a kibbutz, eventually became an Israeli Air Force pilot, and later a captain in El Al, and then he went to Australia to visit her. And therefore I have this picture of her in her clinic. Once she came to visit Israel, to visit him, but again, she was pointed by some survivors, and she fled back to Australia and never came back.
Okay.
But that's an anecdote.
A remark connected to her words about the presence of some of the in grey zone survivors in Australia. We know today the story, thanks a serial on the platforms about the tattooist of Auschwitz, that also him was in Australia after the war. There was an interactions between Enna and the tattooist of Auschwitz, do you know or not, after the war?
I know that Enna communicated with the mother of Hannah Jablonka. There are letters in Beit Lochamei Ghetto, the ghetto fighters' house, of their correspondence. What? Israeli historian, of Holocaust historian, her mother, Trunk, what was the name? Okay, she was in the Revier. She was in the Revier, so she met Enna Weiss. But yeah, and she communicated with other people. I have some. Hannah's mother on the second, together with Margot Schwabova.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. I have a question to Naomi and one question to Victoria. Naomi, we already talked a little bit about Roza Papo, so I know that in Belgrade, right, is a street named Olga Alkalai. Okay, thank you. Because the Jewish identity here in the region is important for me, for my research, I would like to ask you about, from your story, I know that Roza Papo came from acculturated family. She spoke Serbo-Croatian for sure. She was from Sarajevo, but studied in Zagreb and lived in Belgrade. But did she ever refer to Ladino, Judeo-Spanish? And she said anything about that? Did she speak the language? And the second question to you is about, you mentioned and stressed, and I think that Milova stressed that also, that she was the first general in the former Yugoslavia and in the Balkans. So besides Yugoslavia, where she was the first, how do you see this term, if you would like to share with us this?
So first, in regards to Roza Papo's Jewish identity, what I know from speaking with her daughter. So maybe she understood a little bit of Ladino from her home, but she didn't speak it, and they decided to raise their children in a secular way. Obviously, they were both Jewish and were proud of their Jewish identity, but she told me a story on one occasion, because, you know, in the Jewish community in Belgrade, all of the children used to go to a special camp. All of the kids, they used to take them on holiday. And one time her daughter asked her, why am I going with all of the regular kids and I'm not going to the special one? So she said, because it's important that you know that you're Jewish and your name is Jewish, and it's not something for you to hide, but you're not special. You're just like everybody else. And this is kind of how they raised their kids and their ethos. They were members of the Jewish community, but they mainly went to memorial events or things related to the war. The things that she remembers from the Sarajevo, let's say, culture of the Sephardi Bosnians is mainly food. So a lot of traditional Sephardi recipes and things like that, and then some sayings that the parents used to talk amongst themselves when they didn't want the children to know, what they were doing and things like that. So yeah, there was something that was kept from that life, but she didn't want to go into it. She didn't want to. And it seems that she only became kind of more aware of her Jewish identity when the war started. She felt very much that she was proud to be a Jew when she had to wear the yellow band and so on. In her early days, there is a story that she had a friend where she would sneak off to eat some ham so her parents wouldn't know and so on. So it was a big part of her identity, but unfortunately, only small aspects of that culture went on with her. And I'm sorry, the second question,
Yugoslavia and the Balkans.
Yeah, so I think it was obviously a big deal and very progressive kind of at the time. There are other women generals today in the Balkans, I believe in Croatia and Romania, but all of these things happened in the 2000s and 2010. So, the history of socialist Yugoslavia is very imperfect, but let's say it had its moments.
Okay, thank you very much. And Victoria, you described and talked about 3 women from different countries. And I would like to ask you, did all of them give their testimonies in English? And this is the first question. And the second one is, do you know why Stanisława Robilowicz left Poland and when it was? At what time of history of Poland? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the 3 of them did do their USA Shoah Foundation testimonies in English. Etta Nashville too, and I don't know why, because she died here in Belgrade, as I said. So it's quite interesting. I think there's also a written testimony that she gave, which is slightly different from her Shoah Foundation testimony. And regarding Stanisława Robilowicz, she moved around a bit. She was in Israel for a while, and then she ended up in Nova Scotia, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where she died. She moved quite a lot, and she doesn't really say, because it's sort of at the end of her testimony, and I'm hoping I can find more on that aspect. But it was interesting because she continued to work as a physician in Israel, but then when they moved to Nova Scotia, she couldn't requalify, so she took a different degree. She left medical work, and she was older at that time. It was later in her life. So she took a different degree, and I find that very interesting too, that she had that ability to adapt, which many of the women in my study show similar inclinations to either take degrees, sometimes when they were older, and by older, I mean by the standards of the time and what they had been through. So maybe 50. A couple of women who went to Australia, for instance, and had to requalify, and one was 49, I think, when she started her second medical degree in Australia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Krinka Viraković-Petrov and then Gideon Greif.
Actually, my question was one of the questions that Kasia presented about the identity of Roza Papo, cultural identity, because after World War II, considering the high number of Jews of Yugoslavia who perished in the Holocaust, there were only about 16,000 survivors, which is a very small number for a country like Yugoslavia. Half of them made Aliyah to Israel after the establishment of the state, Jewish state of Israel. Those who first left were the Orthodox Jews because they couldn't see any survival for them in socialist Yugoslavia, of course, because of religion. The previous Federation of Jewish Communities of Yugoslavia changed its name to Federation of Jewish Communities Without Religious Communities, what they had before World War II. My impression on studying the post-war new Jewish identity of those small number of survivors is that the young people who survived the war and survived it by being in the partisan units, being pro-communist or maybe not that much pro-communist, but with the partisans to simply survive the war, but they were ideologically or became after the war very leftist communists and so on, and they integrated very well into the new regime, the new establishment, where they felt at home. And in this new situation, the Jewishness, I'm sure that Roza Papo, being a young woman from Sarajevo, studying in Zagreb in the late 30s and graduating medical school, she must have known Ladino, not as a conversational language, but she must have understood. Her husband was also Sephardic. They could have spoken Ladino even at their home, but I assume that Mira, her daughter, as you already answered the question, was not raised in a Jewish identity, a stronger, let's say, form of Jewish identity. It was maybe more Yugoslav or maybe more whatever else. So my question was she active in any way in the Jewish community? Thank you.
So I can add a little bit to what you said, which is absolutely correct. I think that Mira would consider herself as somebody who was raised to be culturally Jewish. And a lot of the things that they were raised with actually came from her father, not from her mother. Her father extensively wrote about the history of the Jews from Bihać. He told her stories about the holidays, the past, and so on. So there is a bit of a divergence within the family in their, let's say, reactions to the events of the war and how they talked about it after. Again, they were paying members of the Jewish community and they participated in events, but mostly when they were related to the war. So things that were more of that nature, not necessarily the cultural events. And on your remark about the Aliyah, she did tell me a very interesting story from that period. So when there was the split between Tito and Stalin, and all of the Jews got passports and an option to leave for Israel. So obviously Roza Papo and her husband didn't go. And mainly I think that because both of them were very well established, they had great positions and so on, and they were accepted and very well respected. But she remembers that her father from that time would prepare a bag. There were bags in their house so they could be ready to flee at any moment if the Soviet Union would attack Yugoslavia and go. So even if they didn't left, they still had that Jewish post-trauma mentality, yeah. And she remembers distinctly that even years after, when the situation stabilized, every year he would change the socks in the bag and the matches, and he basically taught her to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. And later on, with the sad past of the 90s in Yugoslavia, she did actually leave like that. So I think that also a Jewish legacy that they left to her was this readiness and flexibility that is very much ingrained in our tradition and culture. Thank you.
And a question from Gideon Greif.
Yes, I would like to add 3 aspects to the 3 fascinating lectures. One point, I heard a lot about Dr. Enna Weiss from very famous survivor from Slovakia, Cipi Tischauer-Spitzer. I would like to recommend to all of you to read her biography and the biography about her husband. He was not a Slovak, she was. She came on March 26, 42. And she told me personally in New York about Enna Weiss, so you can read her book. This is point 1. Point 2, indeed, there was a colony of so-called functionaries in Australia, because this was, according to their understanding, the most far place in the world to which nobody will come and persecute them. In Israel, they were, in a way, persecuted. It came to some trials and police investigations. So Melbourne and Sydney, especially Melbourne, as you said, Yoel, was the place. I interviewed some of them, which leads me to this last point, which is Magda Hellinger-Blau. She is currently under some kind of investigation in a committee in which I'm a member, giving decorations to Jews who helped Jews or saved Jews during the Holocaust. We have a very, very hard discussion about her. And I supplied some evidence. I don't think she will get this decoration, although her daughter fights for it like a lion. The negative evidence against her is stronger than any other positive evidence. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would, about Tischauer memoirs, I should mention that I did read, there were 2 women in the women's camp in Auschwitz who were called the Queens of Auschwitz. Both of them are unknown. One is Enna Weiss, and the other one is Katja Zinger, who was the secretary of Dreschler. And I wrote an article about her about a year ago in one of the newspapers. She was probably the most powerful woman in Auschwitz. People don't recognize the name. And Cipi Tischauer worked with her in the same office. Actually, she was subordinated to her. I think, if I'm not wrong, that in her memoirs she writes about Katja Zinger, because I don't think Katja Zinger herself knew much about Enna Weiss. And I mean, these were 2 separate camps, actually. The hospital was a separate camp with a fence and a guard, and you could not enter just easily. But perhaps I'm wrong. Okay.
Thank you. Are there more questions to this session? Okay, if there are not, I propose that we conclude this session. First of all, I would like to thank our speakers for their talks and lectures, and then the audience too for all your questions. We have food outside. I hope you're hungry. And I want to remind you that at 4:15 we have our welcoming event when Dr. Suki John will present us introduction on her film, Shema, A Story of Survival, after which we are going to watch the film, and then we're going to have a discussion. But before that, we have a break, we have food, so rest well before the welcoming event.
Really?